The fastest way to reveal a person's character is to give them a reason to look down on someone. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Manhattan glowed beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a sea of lights stretching into the night. Waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays. String music floated through the air. Everywhere I looked, people wore confidence as comfortably as their designer clothing. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blue dress and checked the charity program in my hand. I had attended hundreds of events like this while researching stories, but tonight was different. Tonight I was not here as a journalist. I was here because the Children's Literacy Foundation had invited me personally. No interviews. No cameras. No headlines. Just support. Exactly the way I preferred it. Most people in the room did not recognize me. I liked that. Fame was useful for opening doors. Privacy was useful for keeping peace. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server and stepped toward one of the display tables showcasing books funded by the foundation. That was when I noticed him. Vincent Moretti stood near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by executives, politicians, and donors. He carried himself differently than everyone else. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous only in the sense that power often is. Conversations seemed to shift around him. People watched him even when pretending not to. I knew who he was. Everyone in New York knew who he was. What I did not know was that he had already noticed me. I was reading a plaque about the Foundation's newest scholarship program when a voice interrupted from behind. Enjoying the event? I turned. Vincent stood a few feet away. Up close, he looked even more intimidating than the photographs. Dark suit. Sharp features. Eyes that missed nothing. Very much, I said politely. The Foundation is doing incredible work. Something flickered across his face. Not interest. Skepticism. He glanced briefly at the name badge hanging from my wrist. And which publication are you with? I blinked. None tonight. Interesting. His tone suggested he did not believe me. Around us, a few nearby guests had started listening. I felt the shift immediately. The subtle attention that appears whenever powerful people speak. I am here for the Foundation, I explained. Vincent nodded slowly. Of course. The two words carried enough doubt to make several people glance in my direction. My stomach tightened. Is there a problem? I asked. A faint smile appeared. Not a friendly one. No problem. He folded his arms. I simply find it fascinating how many people suddenly discover charitable causes when influential guests are present. The comment landed exactly as intended. A few uncomfortable laughs followed. Heat rose into my cheeks. For a second, the entire ballroom seemed to grow quieter. Vincent had made his judgment. I was just another woman chasing attention. Another person trying to get close to power. The worst part was not the accusation. It was the certainty behind it. I looked at him for several seconds. Then I smiled politely. I hope you enjoy the evening, Mr. Moretti. His expression barely changed. I set my glass on a nearby table and walked away. No argument. No explanation. No defense. Behind me, the gala continued as if nothing had happened. But something told me Vincent Moretti was about to learn how dangerous assumptions can be. The ride home should have erased the embarrassment. It did not. Manhattan blurred beyond the taxi window in streaks of gold and silver, while Vincent Moretti's words replayed inside my head. Not because they had hurt more than other insults I had heard over the years. I worked in journalism. Criticism came with the territory. What bothered me was how quickly he had decided who I was. One glance. One assumption. One judgment delivered in front of an entire room. By the time I reached my apartment, the frustration had settled into something quieter. Disappointment. The next morning, I buried myself in work. Research always helped. Facts were simpler than emotions. Facts stayed where you put them. People rarely did. Around noon, my editor called. How was the gala? He asked. I smiled despite myself. Eventful. That usually means trouble. Not this time. I almost told him about Vincent. Almost. Instead, I changed the subject. Some stories were not worth telling. At least that was what I believed then. Across the city, however, someone else seemed unable to forget the previous night. Vincent spent the morning moving through meetings, negotiations, and conference calls. Yet every few hours his mind returned to the woman who had simply walked away. No argument. No scene. No attempt to defend herself. Most people reacted when challenged. They explained. They justified. They demanded respect. Claire Bennett had done none of those things. The memory irritated him more than it should have. Late that afternoon, Vincent attended a private luncheon with several major donors connected to the Literacy Foundation. The conversation remained predictable until one of the board members mentioned a name. Claire deserves most of the credit for bringing this partnership together, an older woman said. Vincent looked up from his coffee. Claire. The woman smiled warmly. Claire Bennett. Something tightened in his chest. You know her? Several people at the table exchanged surprised glances. Know her? Another donor laughed. Half the reason this foundation expanded nationally is because of her investigative series 3 years ago. Vincent remained silent. The donor continued. She could have taken every television offer that came her way. Instead, she used the attention to raise funding for children's education. Another board member nodded. She never even lets us recognize her publicly. We have tried. Vincent stared at the table for a moment. The room suddenly felt warmer. Interesting, he said carefully. The older woman frowned. Did you meet her last night? Briefly. Then you met one of the most respected people in this city. The statement landed harder than Vincent expected. For the first time in years, uncertainty crept into his thoughts. Not because Claire came from influence. Not because she was successful. But because every description sounded completely different from the person he had imagined. That evening, as I sat alone reviewing notes in a quiet coffee shop, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. I considered ignoring it. Then curiosity won. I opened the message. The text contained only one sentence. I believe I owe you an apology. Beneath the words was a name. Vincent Moretti. I stared at the message for nearly a full minute before doing anything. Around me, the coffee shop continued as normal. Espresso machines hissed. Cups clinked against saucers. Conversations drifted through the air. Yet somehow everything felt quieter. Vincent Moretti wanted to apologize. 24 hours earlier, he had publicly dismissed me in front of a room full of influential people. Now he was apologizing. The situation felt almost surreal. I locked my phone and slipped it into my purse. Then I went back to work. At least I tried to. The problem was that curiosity is difficult to ignore. By the time I reached my apartment that evening, I had read the message at least 10 times. It never changed. No excuses. No explanations. Just a simple acknowledgement that he owed me an apology. The next morning, another message arrived. This one was slightly longer. I would appreciate the opportunity to apologize properly. If not, I understand. I found myself smiling despite my better judgment. Most powerful people were not accustomed to hearing no. Vincent seemed surprisingly willing to accept it. Across the city, Vincent sat alone in his office overlooking Manhattan. Several business reports lay open on his desk, but he had not read a single page in 20 minutes. His assistant noticed immediately. Something bothering you? She asked. Vincent looked up. Possibly. She raised an eyebrow. That sounds serious. A faint smile appeared. I misjudged someone. The assistant laughed softly. That happens. Vincent glanced toward the window. Not often. The answer surprised even him. The truth was difficult to ignore. The more he learned about Claire Bennett, the worse he felt about the gala. Every article he read painted the same picture. Intelligent. Private. Respected. Generous. She avoided publicity despite having every opportunity to seek it. She donated anonymously. Mentored young journalists. Supported educational programs across the country. None of it matched the assumptions he had made that night. By Friday afternoon, I finally replied. One sentence. Coffee. 30 minutes. Public place. Less than a minute later, a response arrived. Thank you. Saturday arrived with clear skies and unusually warm weather. I chose a small bookstore cafe on the Upper West Side. Neutral territory. Safe. Familiar. When I arrived, Vincent was already there. He stood as I approached the table. The gesture caught me off guard. Respectful. Unexpected. Claire. Mr. Moretti. A brief smile crossed his face. I deserve that. I sat down. Vincent remained standing for another second before taking the chair across from me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he exhaled slowly. I was wrong. The directness surprised me. Most apologies arrived wrapped in explanations. His did not. About what? I asked. Vincent held my gaze. About you. The noise of the cafe faded into the background. I judged you before knowing anything about you. His voice remained calm. Honest. And I did it publicly. I studied him carefully. Looking for arrogance. Defensiveness. Anything. I found none. Why? Vincent looked down briefly before answering. Because I spend my life looking for people who want something from me. His eyes returned to mine. Eventually you start seeing motives that are not there. The sincerity in his voice made it difficult to stay angry. Unfortunately for Vincent, forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. And something told me he was about to learn the difference. Trust is a strange thing. People think it arrives all at once, like a light switching on in a dark room. In reality, it arrives quietly. One small moment at a time. Vincent and I sat across from each other in the bookstore cafe while sunlight spilled through the windows and painted golden rectangles across the wooden floor. Around us, customers browsed shelves and carried coffee cups between tables. The atmosphere was calm. Ordinary. The exact opposite of the ballroom where we had first met. Vincent stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. You do not trust me. It was not a question. I smiled slightly. You seem surprised. A faint laugh escaped him. Not surprised. Just disappointed in myself. The honesty caught me off guard. Most people protected their pride at all costs. Vincent seemed determined to dismantle his own. Trust takes time, I said. He nodded immediately. I know. The conversation drifted naturally after that. Not toward business. Not toward his reputation. Just life. Books. Journalism. Education. For the first time, I saw a version of Vincent that the public never did. Curious. Intelligent. Far more thoughtful than the headlines suggested. Eventually, we left the cafe and stepped onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk. The afternoon air felt warm against my skin. I expected the conversation to end there. Instead, Vincent glanced toward a nearby park. Walk with me. I hesitated, then nodded. The path wound between trees and benches filled with families enjoying the weekend. Children laughed near a fountain. Dogs chased tennis balls across the grass. It was difficult to imagine a more normal afternoon. Can I ask you something? Vincent said. You already are. A smile appeared. Fair point. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets. Why did you never correct me? I frowned. At the gala. His eyes met mine. You could have told me who you were. The question lingered between us. I thought about it for a moment. Then I shrugged. Because it would not have mattered. Vincent looked genuinely confused. How? If I needed my accomplishments to earn basic respect, then the respect was not worth much. Silence followed. The fountain splashed softly nearby. Vincent stared ahead as if considering every word carefully. Finally, he nodded. That might be the most frustrating answer I have ever heard. I laughed. Why? Because it is correct. We continued walking. For the first time since meeting him, I sensed something changing. Not in me. In him. The certainty he carried seemed slightly less rigid. As though he was re-examining beliefs he had accepted for years. The afternoon passed faster than expected. Eventually we reached the edge of the park where a black sedan waited at the curb. A driver stood beside it. Vincent stopped walking. Thank you. I blinked. For what? For giving me the opportunity to apologize. His voice remained calm. Most people would not have. The sincerity felt genuine. Before I could answer, another voice interrupted. Claire. We both turned. An older gentleman was approaching quickly across the sidewalk. The moment he reached us, His face lit up with recognition. I cannot believe it is really you. I smiled immediately. Richard. Vincent's expression shifted as the man shook my hand enthusiastically. Then Richard turned toward him. Mr. Moretti. His smile widened. Do you realize this woman helped save our foundation 3 years ago? Vincent looked at me. For the first time since meeting him, he seemed completely speechless. For several seconds, Vincent simply stared at me. The reaction would have been amusing if it had not felt so uncomfortable. Richard seemed completely unaware of the tension he had created. He continued smiling as though he had just reunited 2 old friends. The literacy centers in Chicago would not exist without her investigation, he said proudly. She exposed financial problems nobody else was willing to touch. The donations doubled afterward. I wish the sidewalk would open beneath my feet. Recognition had never been something I enjoyed. Richard eventually glanced at his watch and apologized before hurrying toward another appointment. The moment he disappeared into the crowd, silence settled between Vincent and me. Manhattan moved around us in waves of traffic, conversations, and afternoon sunlight. Yet somehow the city felt distant. Vincent looked away first. I understand now. I laughed softly. No, you do not. His eyes returned to mine. Then help me. The sincerity surprised me. Powerful people rarely admitted confusion. They usually preferred certainty, even when they were wrong. Vincent seemed determined to do the opposite. We resumed walking slowly along the sidewalk. What do you think changed? I asked. He frowned slightly. Your reputation. Exactly. Vincent immediately stopped walking. The realization landed across his face. And that is the problem. I nodded. Yesterday you thought I was insignificant. The words were not angry, just honest. Today people tell you I am important. His expression tightened. Claire. The facts about me did not change. We stood beside a flower stand overflowing with bright spring colors. Only your perception did. For the first time since meeting him, Vincent looked genuinely disappointed in himself. Not embarrassed. Not defensive. Disappointed. The distinction mattered. You are right, he said quietly. I studied him for a moment. Most people would have argued. He did not. Most people would have justified themselves. He did not do that either. Instead, he accepted the criticism. Somehow that made it harder to stay frustrated. Over the following weeks, our paths continued crossing unexpectedly. Sometimes at charity events. Sometimes during interviews connected to community projects. Sometimes through mutual acquaintances who seemed determined to place us in the same room. Each encounter revealed another version of Vincent that contradicted the assumptions I had made about him. He listened more than he spoke. Remembered small details. Treated employees with respect. More importantly, he never used his influence to force his way back into my life. The distance remained my choice. One evening, I arrived at a fundraiser for educational scholarships held inside a historic Manhattan library. The room glowed beneath warm antique lighting. Donors mingled between shelves filled with leather-bound books. As I entered, several organizers greeted me warmly. One elderly volunteer even hugged me. Across the room, I noticed Vincent watching the interactions. Not with jealousy. Curiosity. Later that evening, he approached while I was reviewing auction materials. Can I ask you something? He said. You already know that answer. A smile appeared. Fair enough. He glanced around the room. Why does everyone seem to know you? I laughed. Most of them do not. It looks that way. I looked toward the volunteers, donors, teachers, and community leaders filling the room. Then back at Vincent. Because when people help you, you remember them. His expression softened slightly. And you helped them? I shrugged. Sometimes. The silence that followed felt different than before. Less guarded. More honest. Then one of the event directors approached carrying a microphone. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw me. Claire, there you are. My stomach immediately sank. That expression never led anywhere good. Please tell me you are not about to do what I think you are about to do. She laughed. Tonight's Lifetime Community Impact Award has to go to someone. Vincent turned toward me slowly. And for the second time in a month, he found himself completely speechless. The moment the event director said the word award, I considered finding the nearest exit. Unfortunately, she was already guiding me toward the stage. Around us, guests began applauding. The sound echoed through the historic library as people turned in my direction. I could feel Vincent watching from across the room. That somehow made the situation worse. "This is unnecessary," I whispered. The director laughed softly. "That is exactly why it is necessary." A few minutes later, I stood beneath warm lights facing a room full of educators, donors, volunteers, and community leaders. The applause continued longer than I wanted. Recognition had always made me uncomfortable. I preferred stories to attention, questions to spotlights. The director began listing projects I barely remembered completing: scholarship programs, literacy campaigns, community grants, investigations that helped struggling schools receive funding. Each accomplishment sounded much larger when spoken into a microphone. By the time she handed me the award, I wanted nothing more than to return to the crowd. "Would you like to say a few words?" she asked. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. I glanced briefly across the room. Vincent stood near the back, completely still, waiting, listening. I stepped toward the microphone. "Thank you," I said. The room quieted immediately. But if there is one thing I have learned, it is that meaningful work is never done alone. Several volunteers smiled. Teachers exchanged glances. Most of the people responsible for these results are sitting out there tonight. They are the ones who showed up early, stayed late, and kept going when nobody was watching. The applause returned. This time it belonged to them. Exactly where it should have. After the ceremony ended, guests approached with congratulations and conversations. Nearly an hour passed before I finally found a quiet corner near one of the library windows. Manhattan shimmered beyond the glass. The city looked peaceful from 30 floors above the street. "You handled that well." Vincent's voice came from behind me. I turned. He held 2 glasses of sparkling water. He offered one. I accepted. "I survived." A smile touched his face. "You did more than that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city lights reflected across the windows between us. Finally, Vincent looked toward the award resting on a nearby table. "You know, most people would have mentioned it." "Mentioned what?" "Everything you have accomplished." I laughed softly. "Why?" "Because it is impressive." I shook my head. Accomplishments are not personality traits. Vincent stared at me for several seconds. Then he looked away and smiled to himself. "There it is again." "What?" "Another lesson." I rolled my eyes. "You make me sound ancient." "No." His expression grew thoughtful. "You make me realize how much I still have to learn." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Before I could respond, one of the event organizers hurried across the room carrying a phone. She looked concerned. "Mr. Moretti," she said, "there is a situation." Vincent immediately straightened. "What happened?" She lowered her voice. "Someone is spreading false information about the education partnership online. Reporters are already calling." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Around us, the celebration continued. But I recognized the look in Vincent's eyes. Concern. Calculation. Responsibility. He glanced at the organizer. Then at me. And for the first time since we met, he asked for help instead of offering it. "Claire," he said quietly, "would you be willing to take a look at this?" I looked at Vincent for several seconds before answering. A few weeks earlier, the request would have felt impossible. He had been the last person I wanted to help. Now the situation felt different. Not because I trusted him completely. Trust still takes time. But because I had learned something important about him. When Vincent realized he was wrong, he did not run from it. He faced it. "Show me what you have," I said. Relief flickered across his face so quickly that most people would have missed it. I did not. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in a private conference room inside the library. Several members of the Foundation's leadership team had joined us. Laptops covered the table. Phones buzzed constantly with incoming messages. The atmosphere felt tense but controlled. I reviewed the claims appearing online. Most of them followed the same pattern. Anonymous accounts. Unverified accusations. Misleading interpretations of publicly available information. Nothing unusual. Unfortunately, misinformation rarely needs to be true to create damage. It only needs attention. One of the directors folded her arms nervously. This could hurt donations. Another nodded. Reporters are already asking questions. Vincent remained silent. Watching. Listening. Not interrupting. I studied the documents for several more minutes before closing the folder. The good news is that this is manageable. Several people visibly relaxed. How? One board member asked. I leaned back in my chair. Because facts still matter. I outlined a straightforward response strategy. Transparency. Documentation. Independent verification. Direct communication with donors and media outlets. No emotional reactions. No public arguments. Just evidence. The room gradually became calmer as the plan took shape. Vincent listened to every detail without once trying to take control of the conversation. That surprised me more than the crisis itself. 2 months ago, I would have expected him to dominate the room. Instead, he gave everyone space to contribute. When the meeting finally ended, the directors thanked me repeatedly before leaving. Soon, only Vincent and I remained. The city glowed beyond the conference room windows. Night had fully settled over Manhattan. You made that look easy, he said. I laughed softly. It was not easy. It looked easy. I gathered my notes. That is usually the goal. Silence settled briefly between us. Then Vincent surprised me again. You know what the strange part is? I glanced up. What? He looked toward the empty chairs surrounding the table. 6 months ago, I would have approached that completely differently. I smiled. I know. A faint laugh escaped him. That obvious? Very. He shook his head. I would have focused on protecting my reputation. His gaze returned to mine. You focused on protecting the truth. The sincerity in his voice made it difficult to look away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Vincent stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. You were right. I frowned. About what? He slipped his hands into his pockets. The day in the park. The memory returned immediately. Your accomplishments are not personality traits. Vincent stared out across Manhattan's endless lights. I spent years measuring people by status, influence, connections. He turned toward me. You measure people differently. My throat tightened unexpectedly. How? A small smile appeared. Not confident. Not guarded. Honest. By who they are when nobody benefits from noticing. The room fell silent. Outside, the city continued moving beneath the night sky. Inside, something else shifted. Not romance. Not yet. Something more important. Respect. The kind that cannot be bought, inherited, or demanded. The kind that has to be earned. The following week proved something important. Truth moves slower than rumors, but when it arrives with evidence, it tends to stay. The response strategy worked exactly as planned. Independent reviews confirmed the Foundation's records. Donors received transparent reports. Journalists verified the facts. One by one, the false claims disappeared beneath documented reality. By Friday afternoon, the crisis that had threatened months of work had largely faded. The relief throughout the organization was impossible to miss. Teachers sent messages of support. Community leaders publicly reaffirmed their partnerships. Volunteers celebrated as though they had won a championship. In many ways, they had. They had protected something that mattered. I was finishing an article in my apartment when my phone rang. Vincent's name appeared on the screen. A few months earlier, that sight would have surprised me. Now it felt strangely normal. Hello. Are you busy? I smiled. That depends. A brief pause followed. On what? Whether this is a social call or a problem. His laugh came through the phone clearly. Social. That answer caught me off guard. 20 minutes later, I found myself standing on the rooftop terrace of one of Vincent's hotels overlooking Manhattan. The evening sky glowed with shades of orange and gold as the sun disappeared behind the skyline. The city stretched endlessly beneath us. For a while, neither of us spoke. We simply watched the lights slowly come alive across the buildings. The Foundation board wants to thank you, Vincent said eventually. That is not necessary. I told them you would say that. I laughed softly. Then why mention it? Because they ignored me. The honesty made me smile. Vincent leaned against the railing. You know, there was a time when I believed influence solved everything. I glanced toward him. And now? His eyes followed the horizon. Now I think influence only reveals who people already are. The statement lingered between us. It sounded like something he would never have said when we first met. Back then, he had measured the world through power and position. Now he seemed more interested in character. The change felt genuine. Not because he told me it was. Because I had watched it happen. You changed, I said quietly. Vincent looked at me. I know. For a moment, neither of us looked away. The city noise drifted upward from the streets below. Car horns. Distant laughter. Life continuing in every direction. Then Vincent surprised me again. I need your advice. I blinked. That might be a dangerous decision. A smile appeared. Probably. He reached into his jacket and removed a folded invitation. There is a charity gala next month. I immediately laughed. You are not serious. Unfortunately, I am. He handed me the invitation. The event was being held in the very same ballroom where we first met. The same room. The same foundation. The same people. Realization slowly settled over me. Vincent watched my reaction carefully. I spent months fixing what happened privately, he said. Some mistakes deserve more than a private correction. My heartbeat slowed, then quickened again. Because for the first time, I understood exactly what he intended to do. And something told me the entire city was about to witness it. The ballroom looked exactly the same. The same crystal chandeliers. The same sweeping windows overlooking Manhattan. The same polished floors reflecting golden light across the room. Yet everything felt different. A month had passed since the rooftop conversation, and tonight the annual charity gala had returned. Guests filled the ballroom with laughter and conversation. Donors, educators, journalists, and community leaders moved between tables dressed in elegant evening attire. As I stepped through the entrance, memories immediately surfaced. This was where Vincent had judged me. This was where everything had started. I spotted him across the room speaking with several foundation directors. He looked confident as always, but when his eyes found mine, something softened in his expression. Respect. Gratitude. Something deeper. The evening progressed normally at first. Speeches. Fundraising announcements. Scholarship presentations. Then Vincent stepped onto the stage. The room gradually fell silent. Hundreds of guests turned toward him. I expected a standard address about community programs and future partnerships. Instead, Vincent surprised everyone, including me. He stood beneath the lights and looked out across the ballroom for several long seconds before speaking. A year ago, I made a mistake in this room. The audience immediately grew quieter. Vincent was not a man known for public confessions. I looked at someone and decided who they were before taking the time to learn the truth. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Around me, several people exchanged curious glances. Vincent continued. The mistake was not that I lacked information. The mistake was believing I already had enough. The room remained completely silent. Every eye was fixed on him. That person taught me something I should have learned much earlier. Character matters more than status. Kindness matters more than influence. And respect should never depend on what someone can do for you. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my chest. Vincent turned slightly and looked directly toward me. There was no hesitation. No embarrassment. Only honesty. Claire Bennett changed the way I see people. A murmur moved through the crowd. Vincent ignored it. Not because of her accomplishments. Not because of her reputation. Because of who she is when nobody is watching. The silence that followed felt almost overwhelming. Then the first applause began. One person. Then another. Soon the entire ballroom rose to its feet. I stood frozen for a moment before finally laughing through unexpected tears. Not because I enjoyed attention. Because I understood how difficult that speech had been for him. Vincent had not protected his pride. He had chosen truth instead. Later that evening, after the guests had begun leaving, we found ourselves standing beside the windows overlooking the city. Manhattan glittered beneath the night sky. The same view. A completely different ending. You did not have to do that, I said quietly. Vincent smiled. Yes, I did. I looked at him. Why? He slipped his hands into his pockets and glanced toward the city lights. Because the first thing I ever gave you was a wrong impression. His eyes returned to mine. I wanted the last thing to be the truth. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled. The kind of smile that arrives when old wounds finally become memories. Vincent smiled back. And standing above the city that had brought us together, we stepped forward into a future built not on assumptions, but on understanding. Not on power, but on respect. And sometimes, that is where the best love stories truly begin.